Hi again for Republicans Overseas TV. I'm Jonathan Constantine from Greece, and I'm happy to have with us Jim Gosart, Vice President of Republicans Overseas. Jim, a lot of stuff happened in the United States in Salt Lake City with the RNC, but a lot of our viewers don't really know what the RNC is really about. Could you give us some insight?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jonathan. The RNC, when you break it down, the Republican National Committee really has only two required jobs. That is to nominate a president and vice president candidate for the Republican Party once every 4 years. That's really it. Everything else that the RNC does is on top of that sort of legal requirement. But that is the true, when you break it down, that's the essential role of the RNC, is to nominate a president and vice president once every 4 years for the Republican Party. Beyond that, much of what they do is acting as a, if you will, a force multiplier, supporting individuals, supporting Republican state parties with data, with resources on the ground, with communications, with marketing, with media, all of these various things. And what's I think most interesting about the RNC is when you look at its connection with state and national law, because the election process itself, by the Constitution, it's really up to the states. The means, time, and place, manner, time, and place. It's a constitutional requirement that is with the states, so that what the RNC does in terms of the nomination of its candidates, it has to connect with state law, and therefore it has to stand up in court. So many of the decisions that get taken by the RNC, it can seem to an outsider as if they're rather arcane in the number of steps that happen. And it's not just sort of the RNC coming out and deciding, hey, we're not going to participate, for example, in the Commission for Presidential Debates. Well, they can't just send those guys an email. It has to follow a proper procedure within the RNC as to how those steps are done, and to make sure that it connects with various state laws, to make sure that that such a decision has teeth in the Republican Party, and that it will stand up in court. Um, the RNC also is responsible for the Republican Party platform. Uh, what does the Republican Party stand for? That's often embedded in the Republican. It's a document prepared every 4 years by the Republican National Committee. But it's important to when you see how that document is prepared, well, you have to know how the RNC is organized, because it's not a decision by a bunch of executives in a smoke-filled room. The Republican Party platform is compiled by representatives from 50 states and 6 territories in equal representation in a very democratic process that, once again, it stands the time of being a compiled process, a compiled document, which states very democratically uh, what the Republican Party stands for. So let me wrap this segment by just stating kind of the organization of the RNC. I think that's important for everyone to know. The RNC has 168 voting members, and oftentimes within the RNC, that's referred to casually as the 168. Now, the reason that you get to 168 voting members is there's 50 states and 6 recognized territories: District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Northern Marianas, Guam, Samoa, etc. I think I'm leaving one out. Um, and each of those states and territories has 3 representatives: a state party chair, a national committee man, and a national committee woman. So you take the 56 states and territories times 3 representatives from each state or territory, and you end up with 168 voting members. What that creates is a voting structure that I think you could say theoretically it resembles the United States Senate. It's not represented by population. It's not weighted by population. It's equal weighted by states and territories. So the voting structure within the RNC, the state of Wyoming, with I think the population is less than a million. I'm not quite sure what it is. It's probably 600,000 or 700,000, something like that. The state of Wyoming has equal weight in these votes as the state of California with a 40 million population. So the structure of the RNC, it's quite interesting, and I think it's relevant to anybody who's interested in the workings of the RNC. You have to know what that basic structure is. Our chairman, taking it back to uh, Republicans Overseas for a moment, the chairman of Republicans Overseas, Solomon Yu, is one of the 168 voting members because for 20 years he has been the National Committee man for the state of Oregon. And so that's what that connection is. So, Jonathan, in a nutshell, that's kind of the basics of the RNC. Oh, one more very quickly. The RNC has 3 national meetings a year, a winter, spring, and summer meeting. There is no meeting in the fall because it oftentimes conflicts with the election cycle. And what we are attending, what just concluded, is the winter RNC meeting.
Yes. You know, one of the big questions that most citizens have, and a lot of people overseas, is can the RNC take a decision to stop being to oust somebody from the party? That's something we've always tried to explain to other people all over the world. That's very far hard for them to understand. And I'm talking in relation to the decision by the RNC to censure 2 top politicians of the Republican Party.
You know, I have to be honest, I'm not quite sure whether you can actually expel someone from the party, but there was a really important vote taken this week, and perhaps we should get right into it. It's one of the most visible votes taken, and that was to censure uh, Congresswoman Cheney from Wyoming and Congressman Kinzinger
Yeah, so that
over
really
their.
made the headlines. But we've been trying to explain to people in the United States and abroad that the RNC really can't expel somebody because when you register to vote, you decide whether you want to list yourself as a Republican or a Democrat. Now that's an individual decision. That's something that only you can take back. So in answer to a lot of the questions that are being posed internationally and nationally, no, the RNC really can't do that because it's the person's decision. It's these persons that have to revoke their decision by themselves. Nobody can oust them from a party that they have never applied to join. You don't become a Republican by signing an application and saying that I would like to join the Republican Party. Could you please accept me? You just go, when you register as a voter, you select by yourself. That's not conditional on acceptance or refusal. So as an attorney, my answer is no. No party, either side, can expel somebody that actually didn't apply to become one of their members. But we'll be doing an in-depth TV show on what exactly happened in Salt Lake. I'd like a little bit, before we wrap up, for us to understand what are the powers of the RNC and how the Republican National Committee and how it actually affects the Republicans who are in the administration. Can the RNC force a Republican who is in some position of authority to follow the party line?
No, but they can deny resources. And you're going to see that in a couple of decisions that were taken this week. where in the case of the debates, there are rules that the RNC is going to set forth in terms of the debates. You see, what the RNC, in their process of nominating a presidential candidate, uh, they want to exert control over, and this is relatively new. I'm going back, say, by relatively new, I mean 4 to 6 years time frame. The Republican National Committee has exerted a great deal of control over the process of presidential debates. If you remember back to the 2012 election cycle, um, there was a very unwieldy number of debates. There were something like 21 debates held during that cycle. And every media outlet that wanted to conduct a debate would issue an invitation. There were multiple candidates from both parties, and every week you had a different debate, different forum, different media outlet. Well, this process became so unwieldy and at times incredibly unfair when you have a left-leaning media that has oftentimes tremendous bias against the Republican Party. Uh, the RNC found this to be an incredibly unfair means to present our candidates, our in this case our primary candidates, to the American voter. So the RNC then took control and said, okay, if you want support from the RNC is going to determine how many recognized, sanctioned, meaning recognized, sanctioned debates the RNC will support during a particular election cycle. And so the number of debates went from a freewheeling number of debates, 21, many of which were incredibly hostile to Republican candidates. It went down to a very manageable 7 debates. So now, when you talk, for example, about the power of the RNC, can the RNC prohibit a Republican declared Republican candidate from participating in a non-sanctioned debate? Well, no, it can't. But if a candidate were to do that, then the RNC could prohibit them from participating in the sanctioned debates, which are going to have much more support and much more reach to the American voter. So you see things like that, embedding themselves in the various rules and decisions that the RNC will make.
Yes, so basically what we're saying is the RNC has much less control over what the politicians who have run under its platform can do than what we see in other countries. For one reason, the only thing I would think that these politicians would worry about is whether they get reelected. So there is no means to force them to comply to what we could call a party line. Let's wrap up this show, and our next show will be about what happened in Salt Lake City. Jim, do you have a closing remark and something we can wrap up for us to be able to tell our audience what the RNC is actually doing and what are its limits?
Well, yeah, I think there were, first, I think in subsequent video, we can discuss some of the decisions that were made in the last few days, some of which might seem arcane, but are very, very consequential in terms of how the nominating process is gonna be going forward. In terms of limits on the RNC, I just want to add to your point about what you can and can't tell a candidate to do. You have a similar number of rules that trickle down into the state level. So state parties also, if a candidate wants to receive state funds from the Republican Party, then they oftentimes need to adhere to these to certain policies or recommendations. But I think compared to many countries, you're probably right in terms of party requirements for a candidate in terms of getting support from the political party.
Thank you, Jim, and we'll be seeing you very soon on our next show. Bye for now. This is Jonathan Constantine, head of the Hellenic Chapter RO, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jonathan.